Okay, I think we are live now, and I'd like to start off by welcoming all the participants on the session today. So it looks like we have quite a few. Like to thank Payments Canada for inviting me and the other participants as well today to the session. As I say, I've heard nothing but good things about the summit, and in the video, I think I agree with that. Payments are certainly going digital. And that's going to relate a lot to the conversation that we're going to have today. I have two panelists joining me, and this is going to kind of be open dialogue. We're going to welcome any questions along the way. We have had dialogue with each other much about the topic that we're going to discuss. Hopefully, you'll find that exchange valuable. But again, anytime you have a question, use that chat box. And we can stop and answer questions along the way as well. I'll first ask Craig to introduce himself, and then we'll get introductions out of the way here.
Thanks, George. Craig Borysowich. I'm the Principal Technology Architect with Payments Canada, and I've been involved in been one of the drivers of delivery of APIs here at Payments Canada, from our public APIs on FIF and CCIN to also the APIs that are coming with the Links high-value platform and real-time payments rail.
Thanks, Craig. And Ellie?
Great. Thanks, George. My name is Ellie Polanco, and I'm founder and CEO of Nivelo, where we are building API infrastructure to help businesses eliminate payment risk.
Thanks. And I am George Throckmorton. I'm Managing Director at Nacha. I'll get into my role at Nacha a little bit later as we get into the conversation. I think if we were thinking about how we would split up or have an agenda for today and in the dialogue, I think it's going to be around two things. We're going to talk about open APIs. And I know that's a topic that's been discussed a lot over the last several years, maybe painstakingly discussed. But we are going to talk about open APIs. But I think more importantly, the second part of our conversation is going to be around standardization and what type of role does that play. So I would kind of lead off with a comment related to open APIs, and I'll let Craig and Ellie comment as well. So we've watched this along the way, right? My background is in banking, and so my technology knowledge of an API is quite dated. We would use APIs in the financial institution because we would have a lack of integration between systems, and we needed those computers to talk. Whether that be providing data on a web screen so that a customer could see their credit card balance right along with their DDA balances and that type of thing, or other systems that I may not have understood, but I knew the word or the acronym API, and it was a well-known technology, something pretty simple for the developers to write, and a good way to have those systems talk to one another. But I think what we saw over the past, even 10 years, is we began to see that technology used for other reasons. And when we think about an API connecting computer systems or technology and systems, it became more about connecting systems outside of the financial institution, and doing that for a number of reasons. And we'll kind of talk about those in just a second. But that really started to proliferate through the industry, through the payments industry, over the last 10 or 8 years. And everybody was announcing they had APIs. And what I saw along this way as Nacha kind of watched this happening, this was a good thing. And I'll start off the topic. So what did this trend kind of mean as open APIs have become very commonplace today? My first interest was obviously in ACH, right? I'm from Nacha. We're the ACH folks here in the United States, and working very closely with Payments Canada, who's also not only an ACH rule writer, but an operator as well. I began to see the benefits right away for corporates in that APIs were enabling them to initiate payment instructions easier, right? To eliminate the need of windows and batches and these things, and to really have a system that was always on, always giving the corporate feedback. And when we talked to corporates about that, they really did see a benefit in that in their everyday business. I remember in the United States, one of the first presentations I saw was from Wells Fargo. And it was a presentation that was used a lot. And it did tell the story about corporate customers changing the way in which they sent payment instructions, and the benefits being anything from expense reduction from automation. I'm not saying that people got laid off or anything like that at these corporates. There was still plenty of work to do, but they had them doing the work that was more of what they wanted them to be doing rather than managing kind of the payment stream to the bank. And then I think faster notifications, and just I like the term of using a payment type like ACH, make it easier, and I think it did that. So maybe Craig, I know you and I have walked down this path for the last 8 or 10 years or so. What are some of the benefits that you've seen, maybe for Payments Canada or for organizations in Canada related to open APIs?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the buildup of APIs obviously has been a little bit slower in North America, where we haven't had as much regulatory pressure to deliver open banking. But we're starting to see a lot more momentum. A lot of it being driven from fintechs that are basically delivering those pieces, and banks are slowly getting more and more on board. And as we see the proliferation of the use of FDX and other folks that are coming together with API standards. I mean, the big advantage is that it makes it a lot easier for folks that are developing applications, folks that are looking to integrate financial data, to basically get at that data in a common format and in a common method from multiple parties at the same time.
Yeah, Ellie, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're out there, as you said in your introduction, providing services directly for businesses. I know your background is in banking as well. What are your thoughts on the benefits that we've seen for the industry?
Yeah, and along the lines to what Craig says, I definitely move in the world of non-banks trying to provide fintech-style services, bank-style services. More and more businesses, some fintechs, some are just corporates that want to verticalize and monetize their client relationships, are embedding wallets, are embedding payment systems, and as such, having open and standard APIs allows these companies to really get the most out of their customer accounts, but also improve their experience. So that's where I see the need and the benefit of having these style of infrastructure out there.
Yeah, I remember in the early days when we were trying to explain to broader audiences in the financial services industry what an API was, how did it work. You guys are far more have in-depth knowledge of this than I do, but I used to go outside of the finance industry, and the example I would always give would be maybe like a hotel website who wanted to add a map feature to their website so that their customers could not only make a reservation, they could see that map, and they would use Google Maps, obviously, Google reigning, and how easy that was, as Craig said, for that developer to install that into the website. And I think maybe not intended, but we're going to kind of touch a little bit on standardization. Even in that simple example, what I found is just kind of looking around on the web and trying to come up with material that I could help explain to other audiences. That map feature worked the same no matter what website you went to, right? Google Map was Google Map, and you didn't have to relearn how to use the map. And I think in banks, we found that very common in the early days, kind of low-hanging fruit. Well, why don't we use that map feature on our website to help folks find their ATMs, right? Wouldn't that be cool? And I think they were one of the first things that I saw happen. Now, has it been all rosy? I would say no. It's also created some friction along the way. And I think both Craig and Ellie, you had good examples of fintechs providing API features. And where a fintech would come out and say, I either want to consume data from a financial institution, or maybe I want to expose data to them in some cases. You're right. We saw all of these announcements. Think about the last 5 years, all of these partnerships. And there were many, and there are some that are well known. And there are some that I think people are still seeing if the use case is going to pan out. But in the fintech world, they were writing APIs in which could be used to exchange data with financial institutions. And so they would partner with banks. And when any new technology is coming to the market, it always seems to be a race. First, who can build kind of the biggest network of partners? And that's what I saw happening, right? Where the largest banks were kind of leading the effort for all the right reasons, right? Having the most customer accounts and all of that, having the most technology people on staff that could support these APIs. But these partnerships were being developed and are still being developed with bilateral agreements. And so I think that for North America, where, as Craig said, we didn't have mandates from any government entities, it kind of stifled adoption a little bit. In a way, it sped it up in the beginning, but it started to slow as we saw lots of companies who were not able to maintain all of these connections with all of these different fintechs or financial institutions. So I think we started to see the first hint of a crack in the armor there. I don't know, Ellie, to your point, providing the services from fintech and for businesses, did you ever see that as a challenge where a business might say, yeah, this data is great that I'm getting it, but everyone's API is a little different, and everyone's arrangement for the data is a little different as well, kind of creates some complexity for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the name of the game for infrastructure players like Nivelo is removing as much fragmentation as possible. And that's why you've seen the rise of aggregators. Like in North America, there is so much fragmentation that it's all about, how much coverage do you have? How many bilateral sort of like banking relationships do you have? And until there is a mandated by the government consortium-led effort of democratizing service access, a lot of what these companies like mine do is removing that fragmentation. And we take the painstaking sort of, service of creating as many bilateral connections as possible.
Yeah,
unfortunately, that's still the best route possible today.
It is still dominant, you're right, in the United States and in Canada. I think in my example, I talked about Wells Fargo and how they made it easier for their customers to initiate payment instructions, whether it be wire, ACH, or whatever it might be. One of the first things that we heard from corporates was, we love it. We love APIs. We love what that did for our business. However, I don't know if anybody knows, but we also bank at other banks. We have 3 or 4 banking relationships, and none of those APIs are the same. And so what we have to code to and maintain can be very difficult. Craig, do you have any comments on kind of the crack in the armor as we saw open APIs begin to be adopted?
Yeah, the open APIs, it's two things. It's having that standardized API as well as that standardized data and message format that, if you're going to do payment initiation with bank A, it's going to be the exact same format when you get to bank B. And we are still missing that, I think, for a lot of banks across the industry in North America. Part of it, I think, is that it's still seen as a bit of a way to have customer lock-in for corporate accounts with that bank. But the reality is that banks, corporates are not mono-banked, so they are typically building those custom interfaces into each API interface for each bank individually. And I think that's where some of the work that we've been doing from the standards perspective, publishing APIs that banks can pick up and implement. That way, the API looks the same from bank to bank to bank if they're using like the Affinis formatted API, right?
Yeah, and I think we'll go back to that portability issue because portability is something that businesses want and something for the right reasons that banks don't always encourage. But we've always heard that. We hear that on the consumer side as well, right? What bank doesn't want their relationship to be sticky with their customer? And you don't have to be a bank to want a sticky relationship with a customer. We all want that, and no matter what business line we're in. So we talked about kind of how we've gotten to where we are today, market-driven adoption of open APIs, bilateral agreements, really speeding up these initiatives in the U.S. in the beginning, right? A quick ramp up to where we're seeing a lot of organizations that are leveraging APIs now for various use cases, everything from data exchange, I mentioned payment initiation, also treasury management reporting. The use cases were pretty broad for a treasury relationship with a financial institution. And that's what we've been doing. But I think what I also did, and I'm sure all of you did, and probably on the call, right? We're all have been a part of this as well. We've watched what the rest of the world is doing, right? And as we watch it evolve globally, there were some leading initiatives that came out of that. One of those certainly was PSD2. I believe there's also one in Asia Pacific, and I would even we'll carve out Payments Canada for now. But those initiatives were mandates, as Ellie was talking about, from authoritative, industry folks who could do that, whether they be central bank or whatever regulator they be, that they came out to those groups in either EMEA or in the UK and said, look, we have a directive in which we want to make data more available. We want consumers to have more control of their data. And so they mandated through PSD2 that this must happen, that banks must work together with, I forget what they call themselves, financial service providers. They have a bunch of acronyms, right, for all the players that are non-banks who want to provide these services to customers. And so they said, this is the mandate, go do it. Now, they never said how. They really left it to the industry to say over in those countries, well, how do we do it? And I think the first thing that was obvious is APIs are how we do this. This is how we're going to exchange the data. APIs have an ability for strong authentication to make sure we're doing what we need to do against fraud. But as we watched that unfold, we saw a delay in compliance with a lot of organizations. So, maybe the regulators were wondering what's taking so long. And I think what we saw is we can all agree on an API strategy, but if we don't come together and work to standardize that, it doesn't work. And that's what happened. Everyone included in PSD2 who were under that umbrella, including a lot of US organizations, all went to the drawing board and said, here are the APIs we're going to create. Here's the security protocol we're going to have. Here's how the data is going to be shared and what it's going to be used for. Well, everyone had their own. And I think it didn't take them long to say, we have to look for some standardization in order to comply. So now maybe we cross over, but I would ask Craig, you as well, what kind of lessons do you think you saw or we learned from what everyone else was doing while we were kind of doing market-driven adoption of open APIs?
Yeah, I think, even though we were moving along that road of getting to APIs, we were still seeing a lot of fragmentation in the implementation, and even just in the technical implementation of the API stacks. And that's where, again, now we're trying to come together more and more around how we technically implement a RESTful API, how we set the message formats, how we set the delivery mechanisms for APIs to make it easier for organizations to basically create the API clients that are going to consume those APIs.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of the benefits that we believe in standardization. I had a question in the chat room. So if we could hold that question just until one more segment here, I want to let Ellie kind of chime in on what her observations were as we kind of looked outside of North America and what was happening there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spent a lot of time, for example, reviewing the Latin America banking infrastructure, especially as it relates to money movement. And as so we usually compare North America to what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Asia in terms of advances to open API. But I do have to say, like, once I analyze it with Latin America, which is a market that we've been researching a lot, we're still more advanced. Even those bilateral market-driven standards are still not there. So I guess that's my experience. Like, Europe is definitely, I think, the standard in terms of open APIs. There's still lots of parts of the world that are not, it's still really a bank-led data gatekeeping service, gatekeeping relationships, and I think the U.S. is somewhere, and North America is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and I think that will give us a good transition. So we've talked a little bit about air expertise and how the panel, we've been watching what's going on, how we have been working together. We're going to transition a little bit into talking about ourselves a little bit and what air organizations have been doing. But I think before we get into that, first of all, I would leave the topic of what's going on globally, and to Ellie's point about PSD2 maybe being the gold standard, at least at this point. I think what we saw was two things: that there needed to be a standardization effort, and you needed to bring in all parties to that. You couldn't have one party say, we are going to decide the standard, everyone is going to agree to that, and that's how we're going to move forward. It doesn't work that way. Whatever you want to call this, a consortium model, whatever, standards organization, there has to be input from all parties, and there has to be agreement. So once you have developed the API standards, I think what we also learned is there needs to be infrastructure, right? Having a standard that you can come download on a website and read on a white paper doesn't help. There is the complication of routing and tracking these API calls, and we saw that with PSD2 with infrastructure exploding, right? Every fintech organization was over there saying we can be the infrastructure provider for PSD2, and there can be multiple. And so I think we saw those two things kind of went in hand. So now, as we switch back to North America and we say, okay, if we're going to have that as our ultimate goal, to have standardization, to have infrastructure, what will be some of the benefits of that, right? What are the use cases? Okay, so Craig already mentioned portability, improved portability. This is in any sense of the word saying that a business would like it to be easier for them to change banking relationships, right? Not an easy conversation to have. We know how very competitive the market is for financial institutions offering these services, and they do a very good job in competing and providing services for their clients. But at the end of the day, it's a voice that we've continued to hear, right? A drumbeat that said portability can be one of the benefits. The other benefit I'll talk about, and then let Ellie and Craig talk about as well, because you can't have this session without discussing it, and it's about data. Who owns the data, how they get the data, and of course, this is a topic commonly called as screen scraping, which financial institutions are often suspect of for a number of reasons. How that data can be used, how the data is obtained, right? By kind of working with these servers, it can cause some technology concerns for financial institutions, and then security. Anything from consumers sharing credentials, which is really not a best practice, to fraudsters, which we even see with PSD2, right? They had to have another directive to have strong consumer authentication, and even then they've had their share of fraud. But I think screen scraping, if you were to say, can standardization and infrastructure help to maybe solve some of that issue, I would say yes. Craig mentioned one initiative that's going on in the U.S., and we're working closely with them. But I'll let you speak to that, Craig, as well, because I know we've talked about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, the whole screen scraping model is kind of the bane of any technology existence. Because I mean, you are potentially giving up your credentials for logging into a site in order to allow the screen scraping to happen. And then once an app is signed in and doing that screen scraping, you're potentially exposing pretty much all of your all of your banking data could be scraped from that interface. But on the flip side, the challenge is if a bank completely overhauls their website, then the screen scraping completely falls apart. You don't necessarily know that you're getting accurate information for balances or types of accounts and other things. So it becomes a lot of heavy lifting for the app that's doing the screen scraping. And then there's extensive exposures, and I think there's a big part of it is is that data ownership piece. And I think, with a lot of banks, when you have the conversation in North America, banks seem to feel that banking data is banking property and not necessarily customer property. And that's, part of the thinking that probably needs to change, that, a customer's data is their data, not the bank's data. And they should be able to get access to it and use it the way that they want to be able to use it going forward. And some of that may need to change with some of the privacy legislation and stuff that makes that a little bit clearer between banks and customer ownership of data.
Yeah, I agree. Ellie?
No, yeah, I completely agree. And I also think that, and this is something where I think standardization can help a lot, but screen scraping is not great. It breaks. The UX is not, ideal, is insecure, but it's still the best option for a lot of really valid use cases. Let's think of security, for example. We're talking about a lot of non-banks interacting with the customer, providing a service, and they care about security. They want to say, how do I detect fraud? How do I verify this is a real account? How do I know if the funds will be there for us to collect? These are legitimate security use cases that benefit the consumer and benefit the business that's offering their service. And it's really incredible that still it's oxymoronic, but at times as a small business, the best way to bring in security is through leveraging insecure infrastructure. And I do think one of the optimistic takes on standardization is if we can all agree that something like security, something like fraud is a win-win for everyone. It's something that everyone wants to reduce. Well, let's standardize a secure path to share that data. And honestly, like any standardization framework would allow that. Confirming, okay, what are the things that you would need if for an API call that's trying to confirm account ownership to eliminate fraud? In what instances can we allow that? Who will it go to? And you use standardization to sort of define those payloads and packages. So it's just, I find it very oxymoronic that in a way, this very insecure infrastructure screen scraping has been the best option for the smaller, players driving security. I do think that's going to face out as the industry recognizes that use cases like fraud protection and fraud prevention is a valid collaborative, ask. But it's just like a really interesting thing that comes up when you let the market, right, drive the ask.
Yeah. And I think that's going to lead us into the next topic. So in the chat box, I have a message that talks about the asymmetrics between banks and fintechs and access to open APIs and who's got the data and all of that. So it's really about the willingness of these organizations to work with one another. So first of all, I don't believe a mandate's coming. I don't always associate standardization and APIs with screen scraping, right? It is one thing. We are looking at many other reasons in why standardization can play a significant role. One of the biggest is an improved automation for businesses, reduction of their expenses to maintain technology and formats and all of this. And this is why ISO 20022 has become relevant in our world, right? It's not about APIs necessarily, but it is about businesses saying, I don't want to maintain formats for wire and ACH and real time and all these different, I can't do that. Just let me send in my payment instruction. You make that happen on your end. And that's what they look for their financial services to provide. But kind of a lead in to maybe the second part of our conversation today, we did look out after everything we've said, the benefits that it would provide, we then started thinking about a path forward. And when I say we, it certainly was part of my role at Nacha to do this. So we went out and we said, okay, just like we've talked about for the last 30 minutes, this is kind of where we are. Now, where we want to go with standardization. And the first question we asked the industry at Nacha, at least in the Americas, and I think we had very much alignment in Canada as well, is does everyone agree that standardization would be valuable? And that's not an easy question to answer. So you had to have organizations come together and say, we agree we're not going to compete on the API itself, right? Writing JSON code and camel case or snake case and all, that doesn't matter. We're going to compete on product and service, and we're not going to try to compete on APIs. So standardization can help us. We can change APIs quicker because we're doing it together. We can enter the help our customers faster if we don't have to do all that work alone. And believe me, there are a lot of organizations who say, I would love a standard to be out there so I don't have to write my own code. Well, that would be great that I don't have to figure that out. The other part is we asked about other things related to standardization. And this is kind of related to the data question and back to asymmetrics or whatever that is between fintech and corporate, is standardization and the use of those standards along with infrastructure is what's needed. And infrastructure can be probably what's on everyone's mind right now is technology. How do we make these APIs move? But it is also including rules. And so rules are very important as to say when a standard is used, what can be done with that data. You don't have bilateral agreements anymore. So everyone is playing by the same set of rules, almost like a payment network would do, right? You can send a payment to anyone. You don't have to have a bilateral agreement with them. You're all on the same network. And that's how that ubiquity and that efficiency works. So we did get a good response of, yes, that is a good idea. We then asked, probably 3 years ago now, we asked the industry for at least the United States in the beginning, who do you think would be a good organization to lead the effort? Should it be the Fed? Should it be some other organization, some consortium? And then we asked, what would your thoughts be on Nacha? So Nacha has written rules. We know how to do that for the ACH network. We understand how to have governance of those rules and the network. And we can assemble a membership who can bring forward this technology in a way that could be meaningful for the industry. And the answer was sure. We think Nacha is as qualified as anyone. If you are willing to invest, we are willing to proceed with you. So we did that. And I'll get to that point in a minute. What we also did is we said, well, who else is doing something? We don't want duplicative efforts. That's the last thing that the industry needs. And so we did see that there were a few organizations that were doing a couple things. One of them was Interactive Financial Exchange, which is IFX compared to the OFX folks. And these are kind of the internet banking folks and standards around all of that. They were getting into open APIs and how to standardize. So Nacha acquired IFX because they were doing the most and brought in those resources. And then we were talking to FSISAC at the time. And these guys were really concerned with security. FSISAC is a U.S. organization, I believe, Greg. I think I have that right. And their charter is really to get financial institutions together and share kind of the dirty secrets. What's going on so that we can compete with fraud, to Ellie's point. Let's all agree fraud is the enemy of us all. And this is how we can better combat it by getting together. And so FSISAC created another organization that ended up being FDX. And FDX was a group of financial institutions in fintech whose sole purpose is to solve the screen scraping issue, right? How do we all agree on a standard set of APIs that will deliver the payload, as Ellie talked about, and what are the rules around that will apply? And then that actually turned into, I think as recent as last year, an organization called Akoya. Now, Akoya, again, is focused on helping banks and fintechs solve that data, consumer data, and what we all refer to as screen scraping, or sometimes we refer to it. And they were busy doing that work as Nacha was contemplating the work that we will do, right? They were off at FSISAC doing the beginning of that. So we went to the industry as a result of that survey, and we developed an organization called AFINIS, AFINIS. Doesn't stand for anything, it's just a name that wasn't taken. And the objective of this paid membership was to forward standardization of open APIs in North America. So we began a partnership with Payments Canada early on to say, how are we going to go do this? And it's a membership of about 65 organizations. It's a very diverse membership, including fintech, large bank, mid-sized bank, payment networks, organizations like Payments Canada. And we got together, and as a result of that, we came up with some principles that we thought would help us moving forward. One of those principles was everybody already has APIs for what we're going to do. We're not probably going to create a brand new API. If we say, well, let's create a standard for sending in ACH instructions, I've already told you, there are 15 banks who already have an API that does that. So we're not creating something new, but if we're going to succeed, we have to agree to kind of talk the same language. And how are we going to do that when that's not what developers are doing today? So we settled on, we would leverage ISO 20022, what I would call business definitions. It doesn't mean it's going to be XML. Obviously, JSON is not written in that software and in that code, but we want to apply it to the APIs that we're going to develop. The second thing we decided was, let's not just write a white paper. Let's not give a developer a 30-page white paper that tells them this is how you go write your own API. We are giving you the recipe, now you go write it. Might only take them a day or two. I don't know. I know it doesn't take long for that part of the project. But we had decided early on that we would actually create the code. So we went out and built the beginning of an infrastructure that was a developer portal where they could come and download these standard API products, test them in a lab environment or in a I can't think right now.
Sandbox.
In a sandbox environment, provide feedback back to Affinis into what they believe should be changes to the standard or not. We hired, again, an outside firm to help Affinis come up with a governance structure, and we were off and running. We started to develop APIs. At first, APIs were ones that could be used to validate data. Ellie mentioned this before, for fraud prevention. So validating data like a bank account number. I don't want to have to use 8 different APIs because I have 8 different sources. Let me just use one. Can that be something that Affinis could solve? We then, with our focus primarily being on B2B and supporting B2B payments, we then focused even more on what corporates would want to do. I mentioned that we had an API. We have an API standard for payment initiation that is included for ACH. I believe we actually added the wire functionality as well. I think we did. We then looked at APIs that you could go get corporate bank balances and that data as well, and those have been published. And I would say we probably in all published 6 to 7, maybe 8 APIs over the course of a couple of years. So the idea wasn't to publish 100 APIs and document them in a library. The idea is for Affinis, publish the APIs that are wanted by the industry and where we can see immediate adoption by organizations. So we have seen some early adoption. And I think that has been good. And, Craig has been, so instrumental with Affinis because at the same time this was going on, Payments Canada was entering its modernization effort, which was really based on APIs and modern technology, obviously. So, Craig has been instrumental, as I said, in providing feedback. But, Craig, I'd be interested if you had anything you wanted to say or feedback about the establishment of Affinis and what we are attempting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with the work that we've been doing with Affinis and at least giving candidate APIs and making those available for broader adoption across the banking industry, that's where we get to a lot of that consistency. And that way, the folks that write the client that consumes those APIs, they basically need to code it once. And then you can connect to 15 banks. It's purely permissions and access control at that point. And I think also what's become a little bit clear is that there are some differences and things from the U.S. domestic market versus the Canadian domestic market, and that's where I think part of the evolution may be that we're going to start looking at how we tackle more cross-border capabilities for some of these corporate banking operations, and that'll be kind of the next level of API that we look to address.
Yeah, and the challenge I think we've had with international and even from North America in developing some of these standards. So first of all, let's just admit, when you have a group like this, a standards organization, you're never moving as quickly as you want, right? If you're a financial institution and you decide to create an API, you just do it. You have all the resources, you're controlling them, and you have sponsorship from the organization, funding, everything you need. With Affinis, we have to understand that folks have their own day jobs that they're doing, and the time that they can commit to this work, because some of it is on the business side and understanding what the API is going to do, what is the functionality we would want as product owners, and then you have the technical side. Who's going to write the API? We have those sources, and I think we feel like we've been very successful in the work we've done so far because we are excited about the adoption. I will tell you that we see even increased adoption in 2021. I didn't see really any impact to Affinis from the pandemic. We were able to meet virtually and get work done, so that was a good thing as well. And so we continue to move on. But I'm going to get to the next part of this and then bring Ellie in as well. So what we learned with Affinis, right? We create these APIs. We have organizations look at these, they test them, and they say, okay, we got it. But what was missing was what we referred to in the PSD2 model, no infrastructure. There was no way for me to really, not a good way for me to engage with another party and leverage that API, right? I still had to go get a bilateral agreement. We still had to both agree that we're going to use this standard, and it didn't work, right? We heard from organizations who would kind of say, can you route these API calls for us? We don't know where they need to go. We don't know who's going to respond to the data. Whatever that magic is, can you do that? And what they were really calling for was infrastructure. So after Affinis was developed, in 2019, we began to invest in Nacha in the infrastructure. We began to see that was a need to move this strategy forward. And we started with a proof of concept. We did some pilots last year. And we built another product called Fixius, P-H-I-X-I-U-S. Doesn't stand for anything. Again, just another name that's available that no one had taken. Imagine how Google went and got their name. The purpose of that was to be able to support the use of these standardized open APIs between everyone on a network. So Fixius is a network of organizations. They do not have to get out of their other networks, right? If they're in a payment network and they want to exchange data with another payment network, they can do that. If they're in a data exchange network or a B2B network, picture like Ariba, bottom line, they're not leaving that, but they're not being required to join another network in order to exchange data they need to initiate a payment on an AP side or maybe AR to make sure the payment's going to come in right. And there's lots of use cases that Fixius supports for data exchange and also data validation. So we take that infrastructure and we go into pilot mode this year. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about today with Ellie. Ellie is one of those pilot participants. She is connected to the Fixius platform. She is leveraging an Affinis API created by Affinis in order to help her meet some of the needs of her businesses. So I'd like to, Ellie, give you a few minutes to talk about that experience, what you're trying to do. And remember, I'll say one other thing before I turn it over to Ellie. With standardization in play, it doesn't matter how many endpoints are on the network. My API call and response is the same. I only code it one time. So the integration effort is greatly reduced. And the maintenance of that integration is also greatly reduced for participants on Fixius. And Ellie, I'll stop talking and give you a few minutes as well.
Yeah, sure. So just to sort of explain a little bit of what we're doing, we specifically serve the small, middle-sized businesses that are trying to execute payroll. And we specifically focus on securing payroll. We have seen a rise in fraud. We have seen a rise in errors in the payroll system as that value chain and process has moved digitally. And we have seen pain points that are actively preventing workers getting paid on time. And so that's really like what we're working on right now. One of the difficulties of doing that is when you look at the payroll experience, you have both credit and debit transactions. You have both businesses and individual accounts. You have a lot of different vulnerability points. You've got things like account takeover, identity theft, frozen account, closed account, NSF, uncollected funds. Each one of those requires different data points to be able to validate it. We present those data points in similar to a score. We do payment monitoring for all of our clients so that before the cash leaves the door for them, we have provided them with a prediction of whether that payment has any errors that they have to fix. The beauty of connecting with Fixius is that it's an infrastructure that as we look at the inventory of data points that we're going to need to really service our clients end to end, it's become a really helpful turnkey solution. Whereas if you're looking at verification of accounts, you connect to this single endpoint with well understood standards. So one connection, and you're able to tap into this real-time account validation framework. If, for example, George adds on things like account ownership, same sort of agreement, same endpoint, we can now access ownership. And you can see the beauty of the economies of scale of something like that, at least for someone like me that is super verticalized, focusing on the payroll space. And I don't necessarily have the time to go seek out bilateral connections with all the banks existing, looking for all these different types of data. So that's been our experience, and why this type of, and I keep calling it turnkey infrastructure, it's really helpful to us. We can focus on the vulnerability points of payroll, and Fixius really helps us tap into the discrete data points that helps us solve for that business.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. We took some technologies that were pretty forward in Fixius because they serve specific needs. One of those we've talked about for an hour is certainly APIs. The other is distributed ledger, or what might be called blockchain. So just to make sure the audience doesn't leave with the wrong idea today, Fixius does not move money. I know I called it a network. It is really exchanging data. And the type of data it is exchanging is any type of data that can help for payment initiation. So that it does have a scope, right? It's not can do anything and everything. It's really, that is the scope of Fixius, is to allow these participants to exchange the data or verify information that will result in a payment. It's payment agnostic. It is everything from wire, ACH card, RTP, FedNow, whatever the next thing is. International as well. We are having international companies coming to Fixius wanting to help with cross-border payment, and Craig mentioned that as well. I think that is an opportunity we've yet to really address very well for both Fixius and Affinis. Those members on Affinis also would say that cross-border is something we're looking at. So I think we are excited about where we are today with Fixius and also our Affinis membership. They are two separate things, but you can see they really go hand in hand when it's related to use of open API standards. And Craig, I didn't mean to cut you off on that topic. If you have anything to add on infrastructure, please, any comment you would have.
No, I think you've got it covered off. I mean, the only thing I wanted to pick out from the piece that you said was that the one key thing is financial services organizations need to leverage technology to innovate in products and services, and because innovating in the technology itself is lost on customers and really ends up being no value. And that's why coming to these standardized interfaces with APIs and the integrations between applications and data is going to be the bread and butter of making that happen. And
Yeah.
That's why we're looking at the standards in this space.
Yeah, and I think Ellie had a good point about where we're still trying to combat fraud. One of the things when you think about, well, what am I replacing today if I connect to Fixius and use an Affinis Open API? Okay, one of those is you're probably eliminating some manual processes. So, Craig, to your point, we need to develop solutions that have automation. And the second is it's a trusted network with tokenization and the way the blockchain works. We have built in the trust in the network. One of the most common methods of fraud for businesses, I don't know, Craig, in Canada, I honestly don't know, but in the US is something we call business email compromise. And this is where one business will communicate with another via email or phone call or something that's pretty manual, and they will inform them that they've changed banking account numbers. They've either changed their banking relationship and it looks very legitimate. And those businesses have a hard time verifying if it's true or not, right? They don't always take it at face value. They're smart enough to know I should probably check on it, but they don't have a lot of sources to do that with, so they struggle with it. And Fixius is designed, as Ellie said, to help those entities reduce fraud as well. So I think, that's not going to go away. I think with payments becoming digital, we end up with new kinds of fraud, and we certainly see that as our role as well to help educate and reduce that as well. So the final thing I have, we have 4 minutes left, I think, and certainly open to any other questions. I kind of think just in general for the panel, talking about, what's next? What's the future? How are we going to achieve what we want to achieve in North America without necessarily a mandate that would cover, the countries that would be included in this initiative? I think for me, it's understanding we're on the right path, but we do have critical things that we need to achieve, like adoption. Will the adoption of APIs ever be ubiquitous, right? Will it ever be adopted by everyone in Canada and United States? No, I don't think we'll ever get there. I don't think ISO ever got there. I don't think EDI ever got there, right? They all take the standard and then they make it something else. And it's just a challenge of being a standard. But I do think that you can make an extremely large dent by having significant adoption. And I think we're on the right path forward. I think we need to develop APIs that are meaningful now, that can help businesses and financial institutions and fintechs do the things they want to do today, and not always think 5 years ahead. Let's think 5 months ahead and what they can use. So we need to be nimble and quick. And I think as we look globally as to what worked over there, I think Craig and I agree. We are very much interested in continuing our strong affiliation with Nacha and Payments Canada, with Affinis. I think joining our efforts as countries will give us the advantage we need as well, as they did in EMEA. I mean, that really took an effort from all of those countries to get where they are today. But Craig, what are your thoughts on next couple of years, right? How are we going to get there?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a good chance that financial services industry can move a lot of this forward on their own, and kind of tying to the last question that we had in there about whether or not we require a government mandate or more legislation to make some of this happen. Certainly in Canada, I'm encouraged by the fact that 30 plus banks had signed on with FDX and looking to leverage some of the API capabilities that they're pushing forward. That's an encouraging sign that maybe we don't need a PSD or a PSD2 type function in Canada. And obviously we're just getting to the end of a public consultation on open banking in Canada, and still going through the results of some of that to see whether that's going to drive either more regulatory change or if the banks are going to move towards more open operations. And I think that's where if there is an available set of APIs that really enables a lot of the open banking capabilities, whether it's Affinis, FDX, sort of other venues, to be able to basically pull that, implement it, and it's done, the easier it is, then the faster adoption is going to happen.
Yeah, I think where we align is adoption, right? Is where we need to go. Ellie, you're kind of right in the middle of it, right? You're You're not a standards organization. You're not a Finis. You're not Nacha or Payments Canada. You're out there providing services to businesses. I mean, what are your thoughts? Are we kind of missing the mark, or what would you suggest we do to move this forward faster, maybe?
Yeah, I do think we're missing the mark still. Like, I think we should move faster. I think, especially like living in this world of risk, I think a lot of businesses and individuals feel unprotected. I think banks have been the gatekeepers of their money and data, and part of that is enabling infrastructure to protect your end users regardless of where they want to transact. I don't know, I don't have a lot of faith that the mandate will come from the government. So I do think that market-driven, aggressive, whether it's consortiums or consortiums with heavy coverage, I think that's probably going to be the quickest way out. But I don't think we are serving our users just yet because of the inability to tap into this data in a standard open way.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
So I think we're at the time to wrap up. We got to all the questions, so I'm glad of that. Hopefully you guys found this valuable. We could do this all day. We could go another hour. We're pretty passionate about the topics, but I do hope that all of you found this valuable, and I'd like to thank the panelists as well. Craig and Ellie, thanks for joining me, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to talk today as well. So hopefully everyone enjoys the rest of the conference, and I'll stop now so I don't want to make you late for your next session. So thanks, everyone.